The Intel Core i5 series has been the go-to choice for gamers looking for a CPU for almost the past decade. Up until about 2017, when AMD released the Ryzen series of processors, did that start to change. And even still, Intel has a pretty good hold on the gaming market with like the 9900K and KS. When I built my first computer back in 2015, I went with the i5 4570, and at the time it was about $180, which isn't cheap. And now you can find this CPU for about $40. So I want to know, can this CPU still game in 2020? With the rise of 6-core, 8-core, and even 12-core desktop processors, is quad-core starting to become obsolete? Let's find out. So the i5 4570 came out all the way back in 2013 under the 4th generation of Intel chips called Haswell. This chip in particular has 4 cores and 4 threads running at 3.2 GHz with a boost speed of 3.6 GHz. That's a far cry from the 3700X in this system, but we're going to see how it performs in games in 2020.
For those of you that are curious, my PC, my personal gaming PC, is rocking a Ryzen 7 3700X. 32 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro RAM running at 3200 megahertz, an Asus Crosshair 7 motherboard, and obviously my GTX 1070. All on a Lian 011 Dynamic XL case, powered by an EVGA Supernova G5 850 watt gold certified power supply. The Intel system is rocking a Core i5 4570, 16 gigabytes of DDR3 running at 1600 megahertz. The motherboard being used is an ASRock H97 Anniversary Edition, all in an NZXT S340 case, being powered by a Cooler Master V550 80 Plus Gold power supply. The games we are testing are Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Grand Theft Auto 5, Rainbow Six Siege, Rocket League, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and The Witcher 3. We have a good mix of esports and open world titles to really see where the CPU actually shines, and also all titles are going to be played at 1080p on various settings. Before we get into the gaming benchmarks, let's go ahead and compare Cinebench R20 scores, just to see how much more powerful the 3700X is compared to the i5. Both of these chips are running at stock speeds. My Ryzen 7 3700X scored a 4588 in Cinebench, while the i5 4570, the CPU we're testing, got a 1244. So we're looking at about a quarter of the CPU performance compared to the 3700X. The real question, however, is how much the CPU performance is going to change our gaming benchmarks in terms of frame rate and frame times. Alright, so the first game on our list for benchmarking is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. We are running at the highest settings with a 2x MSAA anti-aliasing applied. The average frame rate was 168 on the Intel system, with a minimum frame rate of 108 and a maximum frame rate of 298. Our 1% lows was 100, and our 0.1% low was 70. Now, that might seem pretty good, however, moving over to the Ryzen system, it got an average frame rate of 284 frames per second with a minimum of 191 and a maximum of 463 frames per second. Our 1% lows was 153 and our 0.1% low was 121. That means in Counter-Strike, the Ryzen CPU is netting about a 69% gain over the Intel system, so Counter-Strike's really taking advantage of the extra processing power here. Grand Theft Auto 5 is up next, running at the highest settings but with MSAA at 2x and Reflection MSAA at 4x, grass quality on high, and none of the advanced graphics options are turned on. We get an average frame rate of 84 on the Intel system with a minimum frame rate of 50 and a maximum frame rate of 133. Our 1% lows was 55 and our 0.1% low was 48. The Ryzen system was 25% better overall in average frame rate with 105 frames per second average, a minimum frame rate of 72 and a maximum frame rate of 149. Our 1% low was 72 and our 0.1% low was 64. Moving on, we have Rainbow Six Siege. The Intel system scored a 164 average frame rate, a minimum frame rate of 88 and a maximum frame rate of 830 because of a loading screen. The 1% low was 89 and the 0.1% low was 65. Now, the Ryzen system did exactly twice as better in average frame rate with an average frame rate rate of 328, a minimum frame rate of 124, and a maximum frame rate of 1348, again because of a loading screen. Our 1% low was 133 and our 0.1% low was 97. So Siege, like CSGO, is taking advantage of that extra processing power and really utilizing it. And before I forget, the settings used for Rainbow Six Siege was ultra textures, all medium settings, no depth of field, no bloom, no ambient occlusion, and we used temporal anti-aliasing or TAA with a render scale and sharpness of 100. Another fun title on the list is Rocket League, where we played on all ultra settings with no motion blur or depth of field or bloom. The Intel system scored an average frame rate of 224. The minimum frame rate was 171, and the maximum frame rate is 249. The 1% low was 155, and the 0.1% low was 125. Looking pretty good for that title. The Ryzen system scored an average frame rate of 250, a minimum frame rate of 244, and a maximum frame rate of 252. The 1% low was 199, and the 0.1% low was 169. So Rocket League only scored a 12% better average than the Intel system. However, Rocket League's frame rate unfortunately is capped at 250, so there'd probably be a larger lead in that title if it wasn't capped. One of the more demanding titles is PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. We played everything on a mix of very low, low, and medium, except textures, which was on ultra. This is a pretty balanced, normal, I guess competitive settings for the game. The Intel system scored an average frame rate of 98, a minimum frame rate of 42, and a maximum frame rate of 159. 1% low was 41, and 0.1% lows was 25, because PUBG is not a very stable game at times. The Ryzen system did 46% better in average frame rate with a score of 143, a minimum frame rate of 82, and a maximum frame rate of 216, with 1% low being 99 and 0.1% lows being 55, so it did run a little bit more stable on the Ryzen system, which is not much of a surprise. And finally, the most demanding title on the list is The Witcher 3. Everything was on Ultra with no NVIDIA Hairworks turned on. The Intel system scored an average frame rate of 84, a minimum frame rate of 0. It was getting quite stuttery at some points while it was loading buildings and citizens and stuff like that. And a maximum frame rate of 106, with 1% low being 54 and a 0.1% low being 24. The Ryzen system only did 7% better in average frame rate, but the game was much more stable on that system. The average frame rate was 90, a minimum frame rate of 74, and a maximum frame rate of 105. The 1% low was 67, and the 0.1% low was 47. So even though it's only a 7% boost, The Witcher 3 was probably being more GPU demanding than CPU demanding, so that's why we're not seeing as big of a jump. If I would have bumped these settings down to medium or low, we probably would have seen a larger gap in frame rate. So here's a case where if you're GPU limited, then the CPU starts to matter a little bit less. So that was the video on the i5-4570, a quad-core DDR3 CPU who actually still doesn't do too bad in games. Though if you were making a system around it, I really wouldn't recommend any more of a powerful GPU than maybe a 1050 Ti or so. Anything past that, you start to run into potential bottlenecks. Depends on what settings you play and stuff like that. But overall, surprisingly still a decent little CPU, especially for $40. You might be able to find some better ones for a little bit more, or maybe even some overclockable ones for a little bit more, like a 4690K if you were wanting to go with the same socket. But yeah, that really was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. So go ahead and like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't really care for it for whatever reason. Go ahead and leave me some critique in the comments below, I don't mind. But yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later, guys.